Hello everyone, welcome to Agile Outcomes. How do you know if your Agile transformation is making progress? In other words, how do you measure it? Now the things people classically do, let's say in your software, measuring number of lines of code, perhaps you're tracking story points, or maybe it's how busy is everyone. But are those really good measurements? Are those really going to move the needle? In this video, I have an answer to that question, and I'll provide not just 3 responses, but 4. Stay tuned. Hello, and welcome to Agile Outcomes. I'm your host, Daniel Spencer. Today we're going to be talking about measuring the right behaviors. Question: how do you know if Agile's working? In other words, how do you measure it? Let me give you 3 bad examples to start with. Number 1, measuring number of lines of code. This would be for a software team. Number 2, story points, those Fibonacci numbers. Number 3, resource utilization. How busy is Susan really? Or the team for that matter. Let's go through these one by one. Number of lines of code. So let's say you've got Danny the developer, right? And he's cranking out code. You just could barely see his fingers typing. Well, how do we know the code that he's writing is really quality code? How do we know it's actually improving on the existing functionality? For that matter, how do we know if it's not degrading? For example, there could be a lot of use cases now that are in question because the additional logic that was put in. How do we know that the test coverage is still good or the code coverage is good? So those are probably not going to be answered by number of lines of code, are they? How do we know the cyclomatic complexity isn't getting crazier, right? I mean, we want to simplify the code, not make it more complicated. For that matter, how do we know if the technical debt's going up? What if by adding all this extra code, it's becoming more convoluted, there's copy-paste, so now there's several similar or identical activities taking place in multiple areas of the code, multiple modules, multiple functions or methods. So now that's technical debt for someone else to take care of, perhaps Danny the developer, but maybe somebody else if Danny the developer is not there in the future. So all this is to say that number of lines of code is not necessarily what you want to measure. Let's go to the next one. Story points. So story points, we know these are the Fibonacci numbers used to size up, basically on a rough order of magnitude, how big a story is, and then cumulatively how many points or how many stories a team could take on in a given sprint. So we see numbers that start real small, like 1 or 2, but if a team gets measured in story points, what's the likelihood they'll be motivated to sort of increase those sizes and go up and up? Actually, it's a real phenomenon. It's called gaming the system. I've seen it personally. And so what we know is if those things are being tracked, and the higher the better, story points will probably go up. Not necessarily a good thing to measure. How about resource utilization? Okay, so this is an interesting one. So knowing how busy, let's say, Susie is, how many projects she's got, managing up in the air, balls spinning, plates spinning, is that really a good measurement? Is the number of items on her time card, the number of project codes, really what we want to be evaluating? How do we know how productive she is really? How do you know if things are being done on time, on schedule, to the satisfaction of customers? We actually don't. This is otherwise known as being on the hamster wheel. So when we put Susie on the hamster wheel, guaranteed she's going to go faster. Now, is that the right thing? Is she going in the right direction? Is she satisfying her stakeholders? We don't know. But that's what we're measuring. I don't think that's what we want to be looking at either. And if you put these all together, they are called what's known as vanity metrics. In other words, if you keep measuring it, it's going to be in vain. Won't give you what you want. But should we reward this, right? It's behavior that we're measuring, so we know what gets rewarded gets done, and what gets measured gets done. So yes, if we are measuring these things, then we are rewarding them. This is going to reinforce those behaviors that we just said we didn't want. So what do we want? What should we reward? Well, let's take the vanity metrics again. How about we answer these one by one? So let's take the first one, number of lines of code. So for Danny, the developer, why don't we look at quality? Or for the entire team, for that matter. So assuming that there's been a deliverable, assuming that the story has gotten to done or completed, then is the quality just as good as it was before? Or is it improved? Can we measure it? Can we stand behind it? Will our customers stand behind it? Value delivery instead of story points. So instead of trying to measure how much teams got done by counting up all the points of the stories, which doesn't really tell you much at all, can we measure the value that the team delivered as stated by business, as stated by customers, as stated by stakeholders? Wouldn't that be more important to measure? And for resource utilization, you know how busy Susie is on the hamster wheel. What about, instead of that, how about predictability? That is, regardless of anything that's going on, when Susie commits to something, be it one project or more than one, the customer can rely on it. Susie's word is gold. Her word is her bond. So now business can start making plans. They know that when she says yes or says I commit, it'll get done. And along with that, I'd like to add teamwork. Now, this becomes even more powerful when Susie helps out her teammates, and so helps them become predictable. So as a team, they're more predictable. So let's take the vanity metrics and let's replace them with these good behaviors. These are the ones we want to measure. Now, having said that, how do we measure them? So let's take the first, quality. So quality really is in the eye of the customer, isn't it? Right? If the customer has a perception that your products are of high quality, then they are. But that's a little nebulous, isn't it? Is it quantitative? Is it qualitative? So what we want to do is we want to put some good quantitative measurements on. So we can do that internally if it's a software team, for example, by instrumenting the code, by having good code coverage and good test coverage. And of course, all of these things need to be automated, right? It just becomes an automatic way of working so that when people check in their latest story or latest batch lines of code into the repository, it automatically kicks off this testing cycle to look for things that have been changed, and hopefully the quality is maintained. If not, there'll be feedback, and then developer, or developers plural, will then look at it and fix it. So that's the quality measurement. You can measure those again with defect density tests, code coverage, test coverage, all kinds of metrics that you could put on that through your DevOps pipeline. Now for value delivery really is, again, something that's in the eye of the beholder. But in this case, it may not be customers saying, wow, Daniel, that's amazing. You know, we're going to pay you X number of dollars. Well, it could be, actually, if you have a big program or you have a way of working with a customer that's based on features or epic milestones, you could have an earned value measurement that then produces a certain, revenue stream. But more often than not, what it's going to be is the recognition from the business or your customer for something that's on the way, right? That's something that you're iterating over. It's not the final MVP, but it's something that is definite progress towards that end goal. And you'll get the feedback that this has value. It'll come immediately from probably product group, and then business or business owners. Be fantastic to have that feedback directly from customers, but that recognition that what you've done has value for the feature you're iterating over, or perhaps even innovation that you're suggesting for future, experiment and design hypotheses, that's what you should be measuring. And then predictability. So basically, we know Susie on the hamster wheel doesn't work, but how about Susie getting to done sprint after sprint? And then Susie helping her teammates, and so as a team, together, collectively getting to done sprint after sprint. Now you have a track record. You have stories committed, stories done. Features committed, features done. Now the business can look at that and say, wow, we can start having a delivery plan, or we can start having an opportunity roadmap and actually start seeing how it's going to play out in the future, and do what-if scenarios, and do planning, do forecasting based on this predictable team. And as to teamwork, well, you can measure it in different ways. You could say, how many team members overlap on any given story? Because overlapping, sharing, swarming, sometimes called, signifies teamwork. You could also say, how much does a given team, let's say Team A, help Team B? For example, dependencies and dependency management. If Team A is consistently delivering their committed dependencies to Team B, then Team A is demonstrating teamwork across teams. It's another way you can measure it. All right, takeaways. Recognize when there are vanity metrics, and to take action, measure the desired behaviors. There you have it. Feedback's welcome on this video. Your comments will be appreciated, as well as your likes. I'm Daniel Spencer, and this has been Agile Outcomes.